Hold on, I have to set my, now it starts. Hi everyone, welcome to 7 Minutes in Heaven with Madame. I'd like to thank The Walker. Before we start, I think I wanted to think about a few things, like thinking about these ongoing, never-ending conversations. Like, you need to set the tone correctly, I think, and give the right frame. And so before anything, I just want to thank The Walker and everyone that participates at Madame and all the other presenters. My name's Jeffy. I'm here with Christy and Sissy. And the slides are not going to coordinate. That's just not going to happen here today. I think before I also start, I really want to, I think agonism, it's great to talk about things sometimes, but sometimes I think it's really important to do things about things. And there's a really important action that everyone here can be taking. For someone in our community, CC McDonald is a young trans woman of color who last fall was really violently attacked verbally and physically. And in defending herself, her attacker was killed, and she is her trial starts in a couple weeks. They're charging her with murder, and there's no mention of self-defense, and there's no discussion of the fact that her attacker had swastikas on his chest, and actually they're making it that they can't bring that in as evidence. So you can visit her website. The slides will tell you where to go, and it's really important that you take action. I want to start with a quick, before we really begin, I want to start with a visualization. If everyone could just close their eyes and just real quickly to go to like their place of their like freakiest, nastiest, most vulnerable sex fantasy, whether it's like what you're presenting in your gender or the person you're with or what's happening to you. Just like go to that place for a second. And now I would really like you to go to a place of when you felt you were most active in engaging with social justice and what that felt like and who was there and what did that mean. And I think Madame sort of lives in that space in between like a really scary, vulnerable sexuality and starting to think about how to really engage in social justice. But also, before we begin anything, in this presentation, I really want to call out privilege. I want to call personally my whiteness, my usual male presentation, my class, and not like in that way that's like, oh, I can call it my privilege and it's okay, I totally get it, and like I don't get it, and I think it's important to call that out. Also, before we begin, I think it's important to think about the architecture of Madame. It's the second level of an apartment building, and it's like 2 apartment buildings side by side, so it feels like a really domestic space. Lots of little rooms, and I think that architecture is really important. There's a lot of like public space work that is about like sort of deprivatizing public space that's supposed to be public, and I think we work in a really private feeling place. And I think that privacy and that domesticity is connected to feminism in a really historical way. And you feel that when you're in the space. Also, before we begin, I want to invoke a few people. I want to invoke Ron Athey and Divinity Fudge, who created their work, 4 Scenes in a Harsh Life, here at the Walker Arts Center in 1994. I think it's ridiculous for us to think that we're, sort of starting, sort of having these conversations, this agonistic, never-ending, sort of tete-a-tete conversation, understand that we're coming from this deep historical place, and that work that really started the culture wars is why I think a lot of artists right now are working in community settings and are working as like organizations as opposed to individual artists. And I think that we can really locate that trend from that moment that happened here in this building. Also, before we start, I want to invoke David Wojnarowicz, whose work Fire My Belly was really scandalized in 2010 at the National Portrait Gallery, and right when that work was in the media by John Boehner, who no one had really heard of him at that point, is the first thing he did in office was to make the symbolic shaming of this work and to say that it was not valid portraiture. That was the week that we started working at Madame. I also want to invoke Mark Aguilar. I want to invoke Mark Aguilar, who wrote something on February 18th. I will not resituate my ideas for a neoliberal framework. I think it's fair for contemporary art to ask of its audience that they reframe themselves, not that the art come to the audience on their terms. I think it's fair for contemporary art to accomplish work within a highly specific frame, rather than make falsely broad statements. I think it's fair to abide by the rules of the frame I choose, rather than break the rules I choose to keep for the sake of a dominant paradigm. I believe Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Reframe, tip the access. Reframe, I don't care about your gaze. Reframe, my tools belong to me. Reframe, this conversation is tired. And I think when thinking about...
I use photography to create discourse, photographing everyday life, much of it in my home state of Minnesota. I'm a native Minnesotan, born and bred in Duluth. My first project was in Frogtown. I often include the words of the people in the photographs. This is my first American girlfriend. We met at a party, and she asked me to go to a movie with her. I like American girls. I would like to marry an American girl because they are more pretty. I like how they act, all nice and stuff. I like Mexican girls too, but they are different. I can't explain how. I had my first solo exhibition in Frogtown, pinned 173 11 by 14-inch photographs to blocks of styrofoam. It was up for 1 month, 24/7. People said that might be a stupid idea because Frogtown is a dangerous neighborhood and that it would be torn down. But it was up for a month and was virtually intact when we took it down. My next project was along Lake Street. Photographed the neighborhoods connected by 6 miles of Lake Street. Lake Street is really a microcosm of America. It connects the trendiest enclave to the poorest neighborhoods. Everything that America is about, urban America, can be found in places like Lake Street. I had an exhibition of those photographs at the Walker Art Center in 1999. And then the following year, in the year 2000, displayed those photographs along 6 miles of Lake Street. We approached 300 businesses with volunteers and asked if we could put photographs in their windows. This was a 4-year project, photographed thousands of people. 150 businesses said no. All of the businesses in Uptown said no. In fact, they got a little upset. We're Uptown, we're not Lake Street. It took us a month to put up all the photographs, and there was so much media publicity that at the end of the month, Uptown businesses started calling me and asking if we could put photographs in their windows, which we obliged. The one on the left is mine. 675 photographs along 6 miles of Lake Street. The largest photographs were on the former Sears building, now the Midtown Global Market. There were no didactics or explanations about the exhibit. It was up to viewers to decide for themselves what it is that they were looking at. I remember one person who thought it was a memorial service for all the people who died on Lake Street. Another person thought it was a memorial service for the photographer who died. There were teenage kids who thought it was a Nike thing. 7 years later, I decided to do, or 10 years later, working with Public Art St. Paul, decided to do another project, a 6-mile project along University Avenue. And we scaled this project up with a generous donation from 3M, and we were able to put photographs on sides of buildings. So 6 miles of University Avenue, and again, we put photographs in windows. All the photographs are down now. It was only up for 6 months. But this one remains, 20 by 30-foot photograph on Rondo Library. Unusual, of course, to see photographs in public that aren't advertisements. And how much of all the stuff that you see on a daily basis, how much does it reflect all the people looking at it? We took over a former used car dealership across from Walmart and projected photographs on a giant screen. Steve Dietz gave us this concept and curated this site. With this exhibition, I decided to include words in the photograph and ask people a series of questions. People think I'm Christian, heterosexual, and rich. I'm none of those things. I want them to see me as a normal person, someone who could be their daughter, mother, wife, a human being. I decided to come up with a series of questions. What are you? How do you think others see you? What don't they see? What advice would you give to a stranger? And ask a series of questions and then pick the answer that I thought was the most interesting that people would write on their chalkboards. And I've taken this concept to other places and colleges, other cities, where people create their own chalkboard exhibitions. Decided to, as for Northern Spark last year, decided to incorporate ping pong tables and how to create communal spaces that are playful. And so we had 10 ping pong tables, and there wasn't an open table to about 2:30 in the morning, people from all walks of life playing ping pong. And last year, opened the Third Place Gallery and wanted a place that seemed more like an extension of my public art projects in creating communal spaces. This is Janaki Rampura, where we bring an artist, and we bring in different artists every month. Third place, we call it Third Place. Your first place is your home, your second place is where you work, and then what is a contemporary third place? We have karaoke, and we'll have karaoke tonight. This is a karaoke lounge, but we will have the karaoke upstairs tonight and have political songs. We'll have a chalk talk mixer where you will be asking people to pair up with someone you don't know and ask political questions. And then I've decided to embrace, I started a blog and blogging with a sociologist and taking photographs from my archive and write about it and then hand it off to a sociologist who writes about the sociological context and subtext, like pit bulls and how pit bulls are racialized animals and how, because of their close association of young African-American men in contemporary culture. And in this blog, I started a new project called We Are the Other. I'm calling it a serialized photographic novel, where I'm photographing people in my neighborhood, and it's a bit serendipitous, and having characters that I photographed, this is a documentary novel, connect me with people they know, and then I will introduce them to people that they don't know, and create, using the chalkboard and creating a chalkboard chain and using other concepts.
So I'm going to present my involvement in the Sacred Spaces Contested Terrain project at the University of Minnesota, and I get half the time, and Ross here is going to get the other half. I'm going to show mostly my work as well as influences of my work. I'm also going to talk about Emmanuel Levinas, his philosophy as well, and kind of connect that with agonism, and also bring in the biblical book of Job. So for influences, Gigo is a mid-20th century artist who created architectural spaces, and what's interesting to me about these is the way she's investigating transparent spaces and the idea of the void. In my own work, I think about that a little bit. I take steel, wires, and rods and create these transparent spaces, and I'm thinking about voids also in these. And these structures have neither insides or outsides. They're transparent in that way, and they also reference landscape in some way. So another influence for me is Yves Klein's sponges. For me, these represent something in the natural world that is transformed and transcends through art. And elements in my own installations are referencing nature, and they also seem to be alive. And they are also other in some ways. So this is based on Emmanuel Levinas's concept of the other. I think of nature as other. It's something we're part of, but it's also something that we try to control. But it's also, for Levinas, the other is something irreducible and infinite, and we can't control it. It comes to us and it disrupts the horizon of our meaning. And similarly, in the book of Job, this is going way too fast, Job's system of meaning is disrupted by undeserved suffering. So when God speaks to Job in the whirlwind, there's a sense of chaos, and God also gives a sense that he allows for chaos and for destructive elements in the world. And I think that Cy Twombly's art is an example of that, of the subconscious gesture that is chaotic. So similarly, I'm interested in that gesture in my line drawings and also in the danger of the wire. Also, I'm interested in the visual of drawing and the experience of the body in an installation. And just as the wire structures create voids, I'm also interested in creating cuts in the wall through paint, through black paint that also represents voids. That are also disruptions of the space or disruptions of meaning for me. Finally, my concern is also with the experience and the way we construct our experience of nature. And I think that Lisa Sanditz's paintings do that really well. Think about how we construct the landscape that we inhabit. And so, yeah, like her, in my work, I'm interested in creating a space that is a metaphorical space, a space that's set alongside the real world, and also refers to the recognizable world, but also goes beyond it. And my goal is to make a space that allows for new possibilities to come out of the disruption. So thank you very much.
Okay, and my name is Ross, and I'm going to be speaking from the architectural side. My thesis project looks at Cairo, and in particular Tahrir Square, which is in the downtown. It's a city of 19 million people. It's one of the densest places on Earth. Those two green spots reference the only open public spaces in the city, but that big green one in the center is privately owned and is inaccessible. There is no public space. Tahrir Square could act as a sort of national mall and gathering space like the National Mall in DC, but several aspects get in the way. For one, the traffic is a huge factor. The fences impede movement across it, and the street noise is so intense that it gets to be overwhelming. Social activity in the Islamic world is very rich. In the old part of the city, the streets are narrow, people gather, and overlapping programs happen all the time. People sell and buy and cook and work out in the streets. The downtown is much more open and broad, and doesn't have that same life. So what I want to do is bring in green space to downtown and imbue it with that same old vernacular social life. As many of you are aware, the catalyzing moment came on January 25th, 2011 with the revolution. People took to the streets, they camped out there for 18 days, and in the end, they retook power without significant bloodshed. It was a really radical revolution in space. This image shows something that happens every night. It's a ritual of projecting screens in Tahrir, and I want to design a space that does something similar to this, that allows for this spontaneous public activity to occur. The goals of my design, though, are elusive, though, because history shows that it's very, very difficult to plan for things that are unplanned. Cedric Price tried to do it with his Fun Palace, but what he tried to do was to make a space that could be reconfigured, and in practice, things just kind of stayed where they were and didn't really get shifted around. It failed because he didn't make it defined enough. Film and new media, as most of us know, were really essential in the events. Twitter and Facebook were used to organize. They were also the means by which people projected the events to the world. Egypt has an established cinematic history, which is important, but representation, both visual and political, has been elusive for most Egyptians. Cairo may be wired, but access is unequal and people cannot tell their own stories. Taking these concerns into consideration, this is my site plan. I want to make fixed interior spaces for theater and film production, and then open adaptable exterior spaces. It's understood as as a threshold from the noise of the street to a quiet interior space. Screens are an important architectural element used as surfaces to divide space, frame views, and project film. The precedents are the Mashrabiyah screen and the work of Krzysztof Wodicko, who was here last night, apparently. This model shows the whole passage between the interior theater and the exterior courtyard. By referencing the traditional Islamic screens, I want to symbolically link Egypt's history to its present. Ultimately, my design will be a public space for film and gathering. Film has been an essential part of Cairo's history, and that transitory medium will continue to reflect the changing city. Thank you.
So the University of California has a Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society, CITRIS. It's organized around a set of research themes, one of which is data and democracy. And it brings together the University of California, Santa Cruz is where I'm from, Berkeley, where Ken and Greg are from, Davis, sometimes San Francisco, UC San Francisco, and UC Merced. So Ken, Greg, and I are all artists, new media artists, and we started this research initiative sort of to work in this context that's much more technical. The mission of the University of California Citrus Data and Democracy Initiative is to explore the complex, evolving relationships between data and democracy. Our goal is to enhance the abilities of individuals of all backgrounds in their individual and collective awareness, participation, discovery, and decision-making related to critical civic and societal issues. And I'm going to show you 3 example projects. We critique the website of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology and built an alternative that will allow citizens to dispute and review expert advisors. Key to our design is what has come to be known as open video and application of the ideals of open source software to video. So this is a redesign of the PCAST for the executive branch, and it allows you to see what the background of that person is from the scientific literature. We've also developed metavid.org, a site that archives video footage of the US Senate and House floor proceedings. Visitors can search for who said what when, and also download, remix, blog, edit, discuss, and annotate the transcripts and metadata. The site's been built on top of open source software, and the video is archived in an OSS codec. So this is where you can go. That's the URL. To look at the last 6 years of the congressional proceedings, House proceedings, House and Senate proceedings. Opinion Space was developed by Ken and his students, and it's a social media technology designed to help communities generate and exchange ideas about important issues and policies. It's being used by the US State Department, where it's attracted thousands of participants to debate and visualize the differences of foreign policy. And what you're seeing here is sort of the beginning screen where you go in, you can agree or disagree, you can type in your own opinion, and it will actually plot you in a two-dimensional space of where the other people have registered an opinion on a given foreign policy issue. So these are 3 different projects, and they're all just from a larger roster of work that we've done. And we're expanding the roster as well. These particular projects are deal with you know, three of the national executive, 3 of the national branches of the government: the executive branch, the legislative branch. I'm sorry, just 2. What we're developing now is some more local tools for cities and yeah, some things that are much more California-based, I guess. But what really has, I think, been an interesting challenge for us is to think about how to make an intervention into government in many ways. For those of you who are here this morning, this is really what Carl DeSalva said: design for politics, or I would say it design for government. And it differs quite a bit from some of the other work that you can see the three of us, Greg and Ken and I, working on that's much more, I guess what Carl would say, political design. So there's a space of possibility here, really to subtly change, to redesign particular pieces of governmental websites, is what it comes down to, or other kinds of social media, and to hopefully allow government to be more responsive, allow people to collaborate and to interact with it much more. I mean, what we're trying to do with this particular project is allow people to peer review the expert testimony that the executive branch, specifically the president, is getting from technical experts. What we're trying to do with this project is really make much more accessible the record of Congress and allow people, you can go in here, if you're a filmmaker or something, you can download this stuff at full resolution. It's not just like postage stamp stuff. They give it, it's cross-indexed with a lot of other metadata, so it's a well-formed query on Metavid to say, show me all the clips of people on the Senate who've given speeches about healthcare reform who've received more than $250,000 from the pharma industry. So it gives you a really different take into looking through those kinds of things. So those are three of our projects. We're trying to do more. I'd love to hear from anybody who's working on similar kinds of issues. Thank you.
Wall Street financial practices and culture mine productive assets. It transfers wealth from stable production and long-term industrial investment to short-term financial deal-making, thus enriching the pockets of elite Wall Street actors. Wall Street culture creates a model of economy that engenders crises, insecurity, instability, and the mortgaging of long-term productive investments and capabilities. This time, after instigating a long string of crises over the past 20 years, dot-com, long-term capital management, Asian and Russian financial crises, Wall Street found a new income stream: people's homes. Wall Street sold financial instruments based on these mortgages all over the world. Home was not a site of long-term living, but quick investment vehicle. In order to package a financial product out of people's homes, Wall Street depended upon exorbitant, unsustainable interest rates and constant refinancing. So instead of focusing on risky borrowers, it's important to analyze how Wall Street made mortgages risky and thus created situations where people became risky, where people who can and do pay became unable to pay. Risk is outsourced to the relatively marginalized and the state, not the other way around. In fact, it was precisely Wall Street banks' involvement in and construction of global interconnection, their spreading of risk, that both generated the crises and assured its rescue. The more the world bought into Wall Street, the more leverage Wall Street had to hold the globe hostage. The complicity of our retirement funds, the extent to which many middle-class American security had been outsourced to the financial markets, deters our ability to critique Wall Street. What cushions Wall Street's hard landing is not the bankers' much-touted skills, but the deliberate tethering of their fortunes to the global economy, commanding state support and bailouts. So given the resurgence of business as usual, or almost as usual, in many Wall Street's institutions, why hasn't there been more of a mea culpa? Instead, we have Wall Street actors and CEOs claiming that they do God's work. How can the free market make such a comeback as the best and only alternative, given its massive failures? How can some financiers even deny that they were bailed out? How can Wall Street continue to be key spokespeople for the market? I would make the argument that it's actually the presumed meritocracy of Wall Street in many dominant circles that renders it legitimate. It's not so much the robustness of their ideas and practices. It's not so much the fact that they, in a sense, can truly rescue our economy. It's that they maintain a meritocratic position in our capitalist hierarchy, so they can lay claim to social purpose despite failures. So let's think about how this might work. I would make the argument that it's their self-anointed, but also branded by the larger society, culture of smartness, which allows them to amass market legitimacy, such that their financial advice must be emulated. Surely the smartest in the world can be trusted with risk and our economy. They codify their smartness through a halo effect by only recruiting at the most elite private institutions, such as Harvard and Princeton, places already branded by the larger society as the best and the brightest. Throughout much of the past 2 decades, almost half of Princeton's graduating class went to work on Wall Street. Now, the status and self-belief as the smartest in the world is further catalyzed by the culture of overwork. Working hard on Wall Street is internalized and interpreted as evidence of their own superior capabilities, the importance of their jobs, and the deservedness of their power. The very experience of working long hours is read back to Wall Street as justification for their status and position. By contrast, other workers and jobs are seen as less capable and less fit, thus unable to compete in a Wall Street modeled economy without rigorous weeding out. Elite Wall Street jobs are also notoriously insecure, characterized by job hopping, restructuring, mergers, acquisitions, and oftentimes demise. This rampant insecurity produces highly competitive work relationships and a truncated job horizon that propel a culture of expediency and liquidity, the "I'll be gone, you'll be gone" mantra, characterized by constant transactions and little follow-through of deals or advice once they're executed and sold. Simultaneously, these highly empowered employees are incentivized by a windfall bonus structure, calculated not on the quality or soundness or long-term advice of their deals or of their financial advice, but rather the sheer quantity of financial transactions that are pushed through. For bankers, fortune-making becomes an index of their own competitive accomplishments. So imagine this context. Wall Street financiers and institutions, deemed the smartest in the world, and market avatars, are then intensely socialized into the world where they're not only the voice of the market, but are also faced with a constant expiration date to their own jobs. Given that they're compensated for transaction quantity and not quality, they're primed and motivated to push as many deals through as the economy can or cannot bear, because they are going to be gone anyway. This local cultural model leads to continual crises, volatility, and yes, massive socioeconomic inequality, which Occupy Wall Street has really brought to light among many other sites. It's Wall Street's export to the world.
Ariana Jacob, and the project that I'm going to be talking about is an organization that I started in the end of last year called the American Society for Personally Questioning Political Questions. And I'm the only real member of the society, but basically what I do is that the project is to invite conservative and libertarian people to talk with me about politics in public places, and I'm outing myself as a liberal person and trying to talk about how the country looks differently from those two conflicted positions, but have a civil conversation. So the idea isn't to debate issues or to resolve conflicts, but just to try and understand what the conflict actually is that comes up between those two positions. And the project started where I live in Portland, Oregon, but I've taken it on tour now through California and the Southwest United States, and Las Vegas. And then I'm going to be leaving, after I leave this symposium, I'm going to be doing a really brief Midwest tour as well. And later I get to do a tour on the East Coast, and I'm hoping to be able to get to the South before the election in the fall. So The action of this project is simply an everyday activity of talking to somebody, but actually it's really hard to, in a lot of people's lives, to have face-to-face conversations with people who have different ideological beliefs than you, and at least in my life, that actually doesn't happen that often, so I've had to formalize it into a project in order to make it happen. And there's other reasons that work against us being able to do that. I might be able to talk about that. So one of the first times I did the project, actually the first time I did the project, I sat in front of a library with my pop-up tent and the sign, and it was a really cold day, and I talked with a couple of people, and one of the people that I talked with, he's an evangelical Christian, and he'd been a Rush Limbaugh follower when he was in his 20s, and he was now in his 30s, and what he was interested in talking about was how he'd come to see that the movement of the Tea Party and the movement of the Occupy Wall Street actually has common ground on the basis of the fact that both groups see government as being no longer directly accountable to citizens, and those two parties see why that's happening as being very different, but there's actually the potential for common ground and like common agency between those groups, potentially, that could happen. From the conversations that I'm having, what I'm doing is I'm pulling the concerns that people have and putting them into a question format, and then I'm making these political lawn signs. And the idea with that is that I'm putting the concerns of more conservative people into, hopefully, language in a format that will at least not be directly discredited immediately by people who are more left-leaning. And the way that this project came about is, one thing is just noticing in how many ways our country is becoming increasingly politically polarized, and really noticing that in Oregon State, the way the urban areas are always voting Democrat and the rural areas are always voting Republican. But also in my own life, I come from multi-generational liberal family, and I live in liberal communities, and I am part of the art world, and all of those things are left-leaning, and so I have to at least question that the intuition that I have politically comes from my own context, and in order to be able to really check my own beliefs, my own assumptions, I have to compare, I have to actually know what the other side is talking about. And so I have had this curiosity of, if I come from this background, shouldn't I at least really understand the other side so I can know whether I'm not just like following the lead of my community and not really knowing what I'm talking about? And I think if we only talk to people who are like-minded, I can feel my nervousness coming through in the sound quality. But I think if we only talk to people that are like us, we only get to perceive a certain slice of the world, and that through talking with people who actually perceive the world differently from you get to see more detail of what exists, and you also get to see things that you would be blinded to through your own belief system. And I think that this is an idea, it's like a political conversation project, but it's actually a project about perception as well. And perception isn't just our senses, it's the way our mind instructs our senses to behave. And so some of the things that are keeping us from having these kinds of conversations in everyday life is the fact that there's like this phenomena of geographically sorting ourselves into like-minded communities, which has been really well documented, and the internet now self-selects, it tailors our search results according to our previous preferences, so you end up getting, oh, I'm really at the end already. You end up getting what you already like as what comes to you through that. And news media is really, it doesn't have credibility across partisan lines, so you can't check facts anymore in a certain way because people can discredit other people's facts through their own sources of information, so we don't have shared facts anymore. And one of the things I just wanted to say before this is over is that all of the conversations that I've had people have had really diverse beliefs that don't fall into the exact category of conservative, libertarian, liberal. Everybody is a mix of beliefs, and that every conversation has been really different, and that I have this blog, and you can read the stories of the conversations there, and it's ongoing. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Aaron, and I had the really good fortune over the last few months to participate in the Artists on the Verge Fellowship Program. And as part of that program, I built this thing, which is City Fight, and it's a video game that's about, of all things, urban planning. So City Fight is a simple game. It's 2 players standing side by side. Each of them has an empty city grid that they're in charge of. Their challenge is to fill that grid with buildings before their opponent does. And like the process of city planning, things don't always go as planned. At each turn, a ball flies up into view, and the players wave their arms in an attempt to hit that ball to their side of the city, or to their city. There are 5 different types of balls corresponding to different elements in cities like high-rises and landmarks and things like that. When a player successfully hits a ball onto their grid, a new piece of their city is created. As play progresses, the cities fill up with buildings from all around the world. These are actual buildings that I've sort of collected from Google Earth that are all kinds of famous buildings, and museums, skyscrapers, and things like that. And it's been really interesting to observe the really huge variety of strategies that players develop. Some are very reserved, while others sort of flail wildly to beat their opponent to the punch. And I've seen several really innovative cheating methods as well. So it's a really, really simple game, but it's been remarkable to see how engaged and competitive that the players have been. I've heard more than a few screams of joy at the completion of the game, as well as plenty of good-natured trash talk. So games are simultaneously confrontational and collaborative, and this makes them sort of the perfect venue for exploring topics like how cities are built. Political and social activities like this are both highly competitive and highly cooperative endeavors, and they sort of have to be that kind of strange mix. By some estimates, every day on this planet, people invest over 1 billion hours into video gaming. There are a lot of researchers and game developers thinking up ways to harness some of this effort to solve real social problems, accelerate scientific research, educate our citizens, and really serious projects like that. And video games are fun. People invest such a massive amount of time into these games because they're fun. This is a simple observation, but it's a true one. If video games weren't fun, people wouldn't spend hours doing things as trivial as hitting balls back and forth or slingshotting birds into pigs' houses. Part of what makes many games fun is that they are social experiences. We play games together. While observing people playing City Fight, I saw impromptu tournaments start up, as well as a lot of laughter. A game can change the entire social dynamic among people. It makes me wonder what would happen if we forced politicians and bureaucrats to play a few rounds of Rock Band before making their big decisions. Games are intrinsically motivational. The best games challenge us just the right amount, not so easy we're bored, but not so difficult that we simply give up. If this balance is struck, even failure spurs us on to try over and over again. This kind of motivation could really be useful in tackling the big challenges that we face, like how our cities are built, how we adjust to climate change, and how we educate ourselves. And games are rewarding. A well-made video game balances challenges and rewards. It offers us quick wins when we start playing and gradually increases the value of rewards as we progress. This creates a feedback loop that motivates us to continue playing. And even arbitrary rewards like points, which have no real value, can be tremendously motivational. Particularly when a game is played in a social context, beating a friend at a game can be very rewarding, as we all know. There are a growing number of people that are trying to figure out how to adapt this rewarding aspect of video games to everyday life. They're thinking up badge systems for education, point systems to motivate positive behavior, and leaderboards for energy conservation. And games can get us talking even when we don't want to. They can make us laugh even when the context is serious. If our cities and governments and schools were more like games, we might find ourselves talking more openly and with less hostility. And I think in the end, that games can be tools of invention, that they don't simply have to be time wasters. Games can be powerful tools for change. They can motivate us to tackle big issues and keep an open dialogue when we can't agree on solutions. Instead of accepting our broken systems, could we do better by asking how we might reinvent them as games? And I invite you all to play City Fight at the Soap Factory through this Sunday. Thank you very much.
Sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm a Maki Kubat. I do the Yo Mama Mothering Mothers Institute, and it came out of teaching. It came out of working with mothers in Northside Minneapolis as parenting groups, and them coming to me and letting me know what they need. And in that experience of mothering, we started talking about the cultural legacies of all the mothers that participated. Please share this journey with me because it's a personal one as well as a community one. Yo Mama is an emerging institute that empowers mothers through art making. We come together and we share traditional skills of mothering, mother's work, woman's work, and non-traditional work. And in doing this, we start talking about health, we start talking about wellness, what we need for our families. And one of the things that came out was being isolated and the lack of resources, and our resources going outside the community, but nothing coming back to us. And we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And the question was, what are we going to do about it? The sick and tired of being sick and tired also comes out of a cultural legacy of our background of making a way out of no way. So we stand on the back of the shoulders of our ancestors, specifically African-American ancestors, of how we came together as a community. And woman's work supported not only her family and her children, but also the community. We came out of the legacy of slavery with no social services, but we had a know-how. So looking at our history of mother activism, I looked at some of the icons that made sense to me. As, for example, Angela Davis. Angela Davis is a scholar, Angela Davis is a writer, as a political activist, and her writing being criminalized, her activity being criminalized. And we looked at the lessons from the civil rights movement of our mother of the civil rights, Rosa Parks, and her work. Her work actually was also looking at how women's bodies was treating, women being raped by white men. But we took a back seat to that information to make a more global stance of working with the civil rights for all of our people. Fannie Lou Hamer was a community activist who actually came up with the term sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's the voice I started to hear of what are you going to do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to stand up? This woman was beaten. This woman was sterilized against her her permission. And one of the things that came out of the civil rights movement was sitting as an act of resistance. And most time women are tired. When mothers are tired, we can't even sit down. We're so busy taking care of other people that sitting down is seen as, one, you're lazy, you're not doing enough, and two, it's an act of resistance. So we asked, maybe we need to do a chair. Maybe we should get a chair for us to symbolize we're going to do this act of resistance. So we went to a group called Rollo and asked us to design a chair. And we were graciously hosted by the Walker Arts to come out into the open field to design and build it. So we had blueprints that a woman could take, any mother could take that participated in the group to Home Depot for about $26 and come up with this chair. And this experience showed us how to use tools and we know how to work together, but we also included children and families, and some people just from the public walked in and joined us. So it was a whole day of sawing and cutting. What we also learned from this experience that power tools became a metaphor for reclaiming power, of having power, having access to power and information. I was scared to death of the saw. So I did my little cut and sat down. And then other people came and started studying. So we have this rocker. And afterwards, we sat and we reflected. What was it just to sit and don't have to think about anything else, don't have to think about anybody else, but just sit and rock and chill. So sitting, resting, reflecting, and reclaiming the honor of being able to seat in our own cultural legacies and wellness. Then the Sick and Tired chair began to travel and change. This chair went home with me, and with 10 minutes, I had 6 people coming into our backyard just to sit down. My granddaughter tagged it with green chalk. Neighbors came around and started setting up music, so I thought we need to have that space. So this chair traveled to the Culture Club, and where mothers 16 to 22 were homeless with small babies, I'd say from infant to 2 years, began to do a chair. We did it a little differently. We gave the chair to them in pieces and said, tell us your story of being a young mom. So we got the baby chair. And we have messages from young mothers. And when they began, they were angry. They were 16, barely individuating from teenagehood to adulthood. They were with baby mama drama. They were with, I'm angry, I'm tired, I'm pissed off, and the messages were harsh, and then they became loving and soothing. So we continue to bring this chair around, and we're reseating ourselves in the art of mothering, and we're bringing honor to reclaiming that we can sit down, and we can reflect, and we can say what we need, and we know how to get it because we stand on the backs of our ancestors with all of this cultural wit and knowledge. So Yo Mama is out there raising healthy mothers who raise healthy children. We know that the benefits of rocking bonds mothers, bonds babies, gives us rest. It actually relaxes the body. Even when we get my age, it's good for the knees, it's good for the back, it's good for the spine. So we're rocking, and we're starting a rocking revolution of holding and touching and singing and passing on our stories. It is not just an African-American experience and mothers are sick and tired and sick and tired. It's all women are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we're going to have a rocking revolution. Our next step is this rocker is going to transform to midnight lullabies. And I am asking for resources, and I will have from midnight to 8 o'clock experience of 20 women building 20 rockers. We will tell our stories of lullabies, of loving and nurturing our children, our families, our babies. We will feed each other, we will sing together, and when we wake up, we will greet the morning. Your mama is speaking to you. Thank you.
Someone, actually, it was Roger Cummings yesterday, asked how do artists support this kind of work long term, and we just saw how it happens. We just saw how you make it long term and have a long term lasting impact. So thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. My name is Christine Miller, and I'm here. I'm a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Minnesota, and I know some of my students are out there, but I can't see you. But I'm going to talk about public space. And this is the cover of a book on 6 different public spaces in New York, trying to understand what we mean by public space, what makes a public space public or not public, and how do we sort of create a definition of public space that can change over time. Do I have the power to? Oh, okay. Okay, great. I've also done work on the history of landscape architecture and about how private spaces and public spaces work together, and how private spaces, like the work of Gertrude Jekyll, became powerful metaphors for England and for the power of the empire, and were transferred all over the world. But today I'm going to talk about New York. We tend to think of public spaces as having very essential and obvious characteristics. We believe that they are publicly owned, and they are the opposite of private space. We believe public spaces are open and accessible to everyone, where no one can be turned away. We imagine them as the settings for important civic events, where large groups of people come to protest, to celebrate, and to mourn. We see public spaces somehow part of democratic life, a place for speaking out and being heard. But I would argue that public space is not a concrete reality, but rather a tenuous condition. What we believe are its essential and enduring qualities, openness and accessibility, public ownership, ties to democratic life, are at best temporary conditions, and more often are completely absent. Urban public life is not spontaneous. It is bound by regulation and codes of conduct. The codes of conduct and regulations not only control what can happen on the streets and sidewalks, plazas and parks, but also who can be present there. In other words, who constitutes the public. The front steps of City Hall in New York illustrate the tenuous relationship between public spaces and the right to free speech. The steps were the site of contestation between former Mayor Giuliani and nonprofit and labor groups. One week, the mayor allowed thousands of Yankees to fill up the steps and the park itself for a victory celebration. The next week, for safety reasons, he limited to 25 the number of people who could participate in a World AIDS Day press conference on the steps. This story shows the links between the act of speaking and the spatial aspects of public spaces, links used by government officials to limit access to public forums, and in turn, used by members of public spheres to demand access. The story also shows the fragility of public spaces as sites for public spheres. Even public spaces that appear to be ideal platforms for representing ideas can be shut down through regulation. I'd also add that design and rhetoric are powerful tools for determining who may act in public space and for what purpose. Physical barriers and controls on places, such as fences and security checks at places like City Hall, seem the clearest form of restricting access to public spaces. Measures put in place purportedly to increase safety are the most obvious evidence that public spaces, as many currently exist, are not open. But what about places like Times Square, which is nothing more than the streets and sidewalks? Couldn't anyone walk through Times Square today? While the streets and sidewalks of Times Square are full of exactly that, people walking, not to mention tourists taking in the cacophony of lights and sounds, the history of the transformation of Times Square tells a different story. Times Square may appear open, but controlling access to a public space can be accomplished by restricting who is there in the first place. These constraints can happen over long stretches of time and are therefore much more difficult to identify than police barricades. In Times Square, the transformation of the public happened over nearly 30 years and involved condemnation and demolition, massive imaging campaigns, evictions, and nearly a complete recasting of who the real public of Times Square should be. And I would argue it's much the same representations of women, except now it's Disney's version of what women should be. I'd like to propose a definition of public spaces as hybrids of physical spaces and public spheres. And this definition is a kind of hybrid itself, drawing on scholars' work from very different disciplines. It's also based on the assumption that physical space is important to democratic life. As much as we might like to envision the internet as the new public realm, this idea does not take into account the physical reality of human life and the systematic exclusion of groups and individuals from public space. Homelessness is a constant threat to many people in the U.S., where minimum wage in no way approximates a living wage. Without public space as the only guaranteed location for those without access to private space, individual existence itself is threatened. Of course, saying that physical space is necessary for human life does not explain why it's necessary to democratic life. And while public spaces are important locations for speaking out and being heard, the links between public spaces and democracy are more complex than the former simply being the location for the latter. While public spaces can be settings for demonstrations and protests, they must also have concerned publics who formulate positions about that particular place and who demand action from a governing body, and that governing body must respond. But public spaces do not need to be the sites of acts of political speech.
421, you guys are tough. Okay, and there's a button I can push to make this go, right? This guy? This guy? Okay. All right, welcome to Betaville, a massively participatory, editable mirror world platform for collaborative future making at the local level. I've got 6 minutes and 20 seconds left, of which I'm going to blow another 20 seconds. I'm Carl Skelton. I'm the founding director of the Integrated Digital Media Programs and of the Brooklyn Experimental Media Center at what is now the Polytechnic Institute of New York University and may yet have another name entirely in 5 years when the merger metabolism has fulfilled its destiny. Okay, on the subject of destiny. Prepared by Hugh Ferris, of whom some of you may know as the architect who never designed a building, but who developed the Gotham style as a fusion of well-understood economics, building technologies, building regulations, and European expressionism. This is the most retrograde thing I've ever seen of his. 1946, late in his career, this is what the future looked like to Bankers Trust of Lower Manhattan officially in 1946. This is also, of course, that very characteristic image and vision, the tabletop model. You all look like little ants from way up here in the conference room. That drives much of what we do not necessarily like about the concept of planning. Here, a more recent God's eye view, more typical. And then, of course, here, trying to make sense of an entire week of things actually happening. Here, a landscape architect trying desperately with now very behind the times in terms of what people expect visually, rendering of what Brooklyn Bridge Park will be. The transcript of this, the community meeting at which this was presented, is absolutely a hoot. It's going to feel as big as Central Park. Of course, it looks like rubberized super graphics on asphalt. Which will turn out to be true may never come to a head because all of those piers are actually rotting piles, and 5 seconds after they collapse into the water, they never existed. Good luck with the Coast Guard putting them back. In any case, now let's talk about the new gods. Google. Everybody thinks that you now have to be Google to acquire, process, own, make sense of, and profit by big data. And that while you're at it, you can also get massive numbers of people to give you stuff for free. On the subject of for free, the extreme form. 1989, Will Wright puts out SimCity for the very first time. Since 1989, 18 million people have paid money for the privilege of rigorously and obsessively impersonating a municipal bureaucrat. Imagine what else they might do for free. Of course, we also believe, on the subject of God, that only sociopathic, childish, awful people can produce decent graphics and therefore persuade with visual rhetoric that's actually worth anything to the mainstream. But, ha! A sullen, passive-aggressive clique of Java programmers, out of spite, made for free a technology that will produce those production values. And you know what? They're not actually that passive-aggressive. They're a friendly bunch, which is how they work, and it does work. Yes, that's right, for people like us. Now, in 2008, having been invited to an international urban media symposium by the M2C, you see, Institute für angewandte Medienforschung, Institute for Applied Media Research of the Hochschule Bremen, over a misunderstanding about a project I was engaged in that was actually falling apart and tedious. They thought I was doing this other thing, and I went there and I said, well, we're actually doing this thing for about 5 minutes, and then I said for 15 minutes what I really want to do with this other thing. And the Germans, they said to me, because they too had made a creative program inside an engineering school, and that creative program had cultural and social commitments it was competent to honor. And they said to me, we work on this one together, okay? And I said, can we call it Betaville? And they said, that's a good name, okay. And we did. In 3 years, we built the mirror world that David Gelernter promised but did not produce, and we set it up in such a way that people can go there and they can post designs, and they can post alternative designs, and they can comment on those designs. We built the permanent 24/7 charrette that can actually get you all the way to what the real charrettes get you the first day or two of, and the rest never quite happened. Well, software development actually can do those things. It works. We're just going to steal it. Oh, crap, you can't steal it. It's free. And here you have it. In those 3 years, we also built all this stuff you see here, all of it by careful coordination of creative research and curricular development across 3 schools. The academic sector can, if it chooses to, get socio-politically up off its negative Hegelian ass and contribute. Once in a while. Oops, hold on a second. How'd that get there? Am I front-wise? Okay. Hold on. Here we go. Come on. I'm going backwards. Why didn't somebody say something? Oh, my backwards is frontwards. No problem. Okay, this crazy application, Betaville, in it, you can not only put in models approximating massing and so on and so forth, for a kitchen table sketch in a kitchen table that is infinite, universally.
I want to show you 20 gestures performed by students in my street lab and class and residence classes, both experimental studio courses that have students work exclusively in public spaces. This is not the beginning of the video. Seriously, please rewind. Not like that. There you go, awesome. Okay, so what you will see is the 20 gestures, very short clips, exactly 20 seconds each, and I will provide a brief note on what I think these gestures mean. If you move the cursor, that thing will go away also. Number 1, Rachel and Linda acknowledge each other's presence in the midst of the chaos. You don't see it coming, it's barely there. You sort of see it when it's over. Number 2, acknowledging the place and its rhythm by interrupting the pattern. Number 3, questioning expectations and refusing to behave in a prescribed fashion. Number 4, class is taking the residents in the space between here and there. The space designed to be nothing. Number Number 5, recognizing the obvious, the robot monkey head, and helping the walker see. Gesture number 6, Mel, drinking art. A micro-reenactment of the process of cultural consumption, I think. Number 7, Jonathan helping the city drink the walker. And that's a macro reenactment of the same process. At least that's the way I choose to see it. Number 8, Grace eating inside an artwork, and as a result of ensuing friction, effectively connecting public and private spaces in a span of one sandwich. Number 9, Derek and Jonathan ignoring art thoughtfully while rethinking what governs our behavior in regulated spaces. Luke publicly taking ownership of his private space. By the way, you guys are awesome. This has been a long session. Good job. Rachel temporarily hijacking multiple icons at the same time. Jack allowing the non-art objects in a museum to speak with the voices of curators. This is Derek and Jonathan speaking on behalf of the walker.
I don't think I can get them both.
This is Sophie having a quiet conversation with Jenny Holter. Gesture number 15, Audrey, who did not want to be touched, having a silent conversation with the walker, the guards, the patrons, and the art. Rachel moving earth in order to move ideas. This is Alex and Emily leaving a mark without leaving a mark on the open field. Madeline sharing a surprise gift, set of surprise gifts with strangers. Minute adjustment in the gift shop. Gesture number 19, nearly at the end. I call it casual poetry laced with fear and trespass. And the last, a cardboard rendering of unexpected virtual stoppage reenacted in real life, reminding us how something breaking could be a good thing. Thank you.
And with that, we have the conclusion for the afternoon. I want to thank all of you for a series of riveting and delightful and provocative, meaningful presentations, and invite you all once again to come join us for festivities, for more conversation and dialogue this evening at Wing and Huey's third space. Thank you all. I thank my collaborators. I thank all of you who have put such thought and heart into this entire process. So we won't have Q&A. We do have time if folks want to register, and I'm sure people will be mingling around a bit. We wish you a great weekend and hope to see you more this evening. Thanks again.